Hello friends, in this lecture, we're going to start working on the player. Okay, so the first thing we need to do for the player is creating a new C++ class. So let's go into the tools menu here and click on new class. Here we need to pick a parent class. We basically have two options for the player, a character or a pawn. The character class has its own built-in movement logic with the character movement components. We're not going to be using that because we're going to create the movement ourselves with our own custom code. That leaves us with the pawn here, which can be possessed and it can receive input from a controller. Perfect for what we're trying to do here. So let's click on next. The name of the class is going to be, let's see, top-down character. Then we're going to create it. As you can see, Visual Studio opened up right away, and we can see the header file here and also the C++ file. But inside of Unreal, the creation process is still going on, so let's wait for that to finish. Okay, let's click on reload, and then I'm going to do some cleanup and get rid of these comments. At this point, you probably know that I don't like these, so let's just get rid of them. Let's also do the same here in the C++ file. Just like that. Sometimes when you create new files, you get these red lines, but once Visual Studio, completes all this stuff that's going on in the background, those should go away. Okay, all of the tasks that were running are completed, and as you can see now the lines are gone, and we also get all of the IntelliSense stuff now. Perfect. In this lecture, inside of our code, we're going to declare and create the main components for the player, which are going to be the capsule component and the flipbook component. In the future, we're going to add more components for the player, also more variables and functions, but in this one, we're simply going to create these two. So first of all, we're going to include the headers. So up here, we're going to say include components / capsule component.h. for the capsule, and then for the flipbook it's going to be paper flipbook component.h. And then at the top here, underneath the public statement, we're going to declare these two components. These are going to be uProperty, visible anywhere, and blueprint read write. Blueprint read write. So the capsule is going to be uCapsule component pointer. Let's call it capsule comp. Let's copy and paste this tag here. For the flipbook, which is going to be uPaper flipbook component pointer, and I'm going to call this character flipbook. Okay, so those are going to be the declarations here in the class. Now we're going to switch to the C++ file to create them inside of the constructor. At this point, you should be very familiar with this process. That is why I'm going to give that to you as a challenge. So go ahead and create the capsule and the flipbook components inside of the constructor. Then I want you to set the capsule as the root component and then attach the flipbook component to the root component. That's the challenge. Give it a shot and come back when you're done. Okay, the function we're going to use, we have to use to create a component is create default subobject. Hopefully, by this point, you should be very familiar with this function. It's going to take in the name of the class that we want to create. For the capsule, that's going to be uCapsule component. And inside of the parentheses, it's going to take in the name that we're going to see inside of the editor. And I like to keep this the same as the name of the variable, which is going to be capsule component. This function is going to create a capsule component, and then it's going to return it. It's going to return a pointer to it. And then we're going to save that pointer inside of the variable that we just declared inside of the class, just like that. Next up, we're going to make the capsule the root component, which we can do by calling setRootComponent function and give the capsule component to it. That should set the capsule as the root. And then we're going to create the flipbook component. It's going to be very similar to this line, so I'm simply going to copy and paste it. Change the capsule to be character flipbook. Let's also change the name here, very important. We're also going to change the class name here to uPaper flipbook component. And this is going to create a new paper flipbook component and save it in this variable. And finally, we're going to attach the flipbook to the root component. And we can do that by calling a function called setUpAttachment. And we're going to say root component here, which is a built-in variable. And once you call setRootComponent with capsule component, this built-in root component variable is going to be equal to the capsule component. We could also do it this way. It would be the same thing. And that's the challenge. And that's all we need to do inside of our code in this lecture. We're simply creating these components. Now we're going to exit out of Unreal. Let's exit out of live coding as well and rebuild the project. So simply right click on the name of the project here and click on rebuild. Okay, let's take a look at the C++ classes folder. We have the top-down character class here, perfect. Now we're going to go into the blueprints folder and create a blueprint. So let's right-click here, blueprint class. We're going to search for, inside of all classes here, top-down character. As you can see, it's inheriting from Pwn, just like we set up. Let's select this. We're going to call this blueprint_player and open it up. We have the capsule component and the flipbook component, perfect. Let's start by setting up the flipbook component, which is going to be very similar to the sprite component actually. For the sprite component, we had the source sprite. For this, we have the source flipbook, as you can see here. We're going to set this to player idle. And once we do that, we can see the player idle flipbook inside of the blueprint, as you can see. The flipbook has the play rate here, which controls how fast the animation is run. 1 is the default. If I set this to 2, it's going to play twice as fast. If I set this to be 0.5, it's going to be half as fast, as you can see. There's also the sprite color here. Let's reset the play rate. There's also the sprite color here, which gives a tint. So for example, I could make this red like that. This tint is applied on top of the color. It doesn't change the entire color, as you can see. Let's cancel that. And that's basically all the controls we get from the flipbook. It's not that complicated. It's very simple, actually. Just like the sprite, we're going to make sure that we're using the translucent material. We are, perfect. We're also going to turn off collision. So let's set the preset to be no collision. And then at the bottom, we're going to take a look at the rendering here, advanced. Let's see, the sort priority is set to be 0, which I think is a good number, because the arena and the stuff inside of the arena is set to be -10 and -9 and -8. I think 0 is a good number for the player. The enemy is also going to be behind the player, so the enemy is probably going to be -5 or something like that. We might have to put the gun and the bullets in front of the player, so we can give those positive numbers for the sort priority. But like I said, for the player, we're going to keep it at 0. And other than that, we're not going to change anything else for the flipbook. The size, the scale, everything should be fine. So let's go ahead and set up the capsule component. So currently I can't see the capsule, so I'm gonna have to go here and show the grid, and then I can see it. But I want to switch to the right viewing angle because it's always easier to set up these collision shapes from this viewing angle. So let's go ahead and make the height obviously much smaller. Also the radius. So the radius seems like fine at 10.5. The height, let's see. 12 seems to be a good value here. This might be a little too small, but we can always change it later. For now, I think this is fine. Let's see, anything else do we want to change here for the capsule? We're also going to scroll down and change the collision preset to be a pawn. because the player is a pawn, but that's going to be all. Nothing else we need to change, at least at the moment. Okay, great. So let's save this and compile it, go back into the main level, and we can put one of these into the arena. So let's left click hold and drag the blueprint into the game. Let's put it here. I'm gonna make the position snap here to be 1 so that I can freely move this instead of 10 units snaps. And then we're going to go into the details here and search for possess. And we're going to set auto possess player to be player 0 so that when the game runs, we actually possess this player here so that we get rid of that default pawn that was spawning. Once we create the game mode, we're going to set the player class as the default pawn. That way we can simply place a player start actor into the scene and we don't need to put the player manually like this. But until then, we're just going to have this guy in the scene. We can run the game and see what it looks like. As you can see, it looks like that. I think that's looking fine. But of course, currently we can't move it. We don't have any input. But don't worry, we're going to fix those. We're going to start implement those in the upcoming lectures. Since there isn't anything else I want to do in this one, let's do a quick recap and then we can end it. In this lecture, we started to work on the player, and the first thing we did is creating the player C++ class, which is here. We called it the top-down character. It's inheriting from a pawn. Inside of the header file, inside of the class, we declared two components, the capsule component for collisions and the flipbook component to display a flipbook asset. Inside of the C++ file, in the constructor, as your challenge, you created these components, set them equal to the variables, and then you set up their attachments. The capsule component had to be the root, and the flipbook had to be attached to the root, which is done like this, as you can see. We didn't do anything else for the player. The next step was creating the blueprint inside of the editor, after we rebuilt, of course. Here we created the blueprint player, which is deriving from the player class we created. It has the flipbook here and the capsule here. The flipbook is using the player idle for now. We're going to be switching this from the idle to run and from run to idle inside of our code, but for now it's going to default to the idle. We did some other configurations for the flipbook as well, which were very similar to the sprite component. And then finally, we configured the capsule component to have the correct collision size. Finally, we placed down the player into the game, and now we can see it when we play it. Perfect.